Thank you, everybody, for coming. My name is Dulcie. I am the head of data science at DataKind UK, and I am very excited that we're going to be joined today by Kirsten Williamson, who's the AI product manager at the Wellcome Trust. And if you're here today, you're here to learn a bit about creating an AI policy. As a few kind of housekeeping reminders, we are recording the session today so that we can share the recording and slides with participants and then folks who couldn't make it. If you do have a question, you should see a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So feel free to put questions in there at any time, and we will respond at either as we go, or we'll have a proper Q&A at the end. We do have closed captions enabled, but if you have any other accessibility needs or questions, please let us know. The best way to do that is to reach out to Nicole H from the DataKind UK team, and she is in the chat. You should be able to message her. Great, looks like we have nearly 100 people, which is amazing. Okay, so just briefly about DataKind UK, we are a small charity ourselves. Our vision is that the third sector embraces data use to become more impactful, and we support a variety of organizations to better achieve their missions by using data more effectively. We've recently updated our programs, but we've been around since 2013, providing a variety of types of support to third sector organizations across the UK. Our goal is to help organizations see what's possible with their data using data science and help tackle key organizational challenges. So we do training and workshops like this. We do exploratory projects that are one-to-one projects with partner organizations, and then we provide lighter touch support via our advice and guidance program. If you're interested in learning more, if your organization needs help, please feel free to check out our website, which has more information about the type of support that we can provide. And it is all powered by our amazing volunteer community who work across a variety of sectors, including some folks from the Wellcome Trust, for example, who give their time in a variety of ways. So we're incredibly grateful to them. And the last bit by way of introduction is just that this webinar is the third in a series of events and trainings that we're doing in partnership with the Insight Infrastructure team at Joseph Rowntree Foundation, all about generative AI. And the Insight Infrastructure program aims to democratize access to high quality evidence, and whether that's quantitative or qualitative, and foster open collaboration to help tackle injustice and inequality. So if you missed some of our other webinars, they are linked in the slides, but we did one around an introduction to Gen AI, and then one thinking about how you can evaluate use cases and embed responsible principles. Today, we're going to be talking about creating an AI policy, and later in the year, we are going to have a panel discussion thinking about a somewhat provocative question, like can Gen AI, can ChatGPT ever be ethical? What does that mean for the social impact sector? So today we're going to do a quick kind of who's who, see who's here, see who's already ahead of the game, has an AI policy, and who's just starting out. We're going to talk a little bit about why you might even want to create an AI policy. And then we'll hear from Kirsten about how the Wellcome Trust approached developing their policy. Then we're going to end just by some steps that will hopefully be concrete steps to help you get started. And there's lots of resources and templates that you can use at the end. Again, for those just joining, feel free to put your name and organization in the chat. And we have a Q&A, which we will be tackling at the end of the session. So, as I mentioned, I'm Dulcie. I'm from the DataKind UK team, but I'm really happy to be joined today by Kirsten Williamson. So Kirsten's the AI product manager at the Wellcome Trust, and there she leads the development of strategies and initiatives to leverage AI for operational efficiency, innovation, and responsible use. And her work focuses on the safe and effective integration of AI technologies throughout their large organization. So this includes creating policies, governance frameworks, and then working towards a growing center of excellence. So really happy to have her here today to tell her about her experience leading this work at Wellcome. So we do want to know a little bit about who's here. So we're going to do a quick poll. There's just two questions. We want to get a sense of what type of organization are you from? Are you here from a charity? Are you part of a social enterprise? Are you a funder or grant maker, which you're likely registered as a charity? Maybe you're a smaller voluntary community group, could be part of the public sector, academia, private sector, or other. If you're other, I'd just be curious if you could pop that in the chat so we can know who they are. And then where are you at in terms of your AI policy or guidance? Do you have, kind of working guidance or an acceptable use policy? Are you working on it? You're not sure? Um, just be curious to know. 75% of folks are from charities, nearly 75%. I'll almost call all the participants and then I'll end the poll. But so far we've got about 72% of people from charities, a few folks from social enterprises and other voluntary community groups, about 10% of people from funders, and then a handful from other types of organizations like public sector and academia, private sector. And it looks like 18% of people have some guidance in place already, which is great. If anybody does have guidance that they're willing to share as well, we could always share that as an additional resource after. And then half the people here are working on it. And then not half, 25% said no or not sure. So that's great. Great mix of people with lots of different experiences as well. So why should you bother making an AI policy? So I think there's a few reasons why it's helpful. One reason is that your staff are probably using the tools anyway, or maybe some of them are dabbling with this. It's hard to get a sense, to be honest, about like how widespread the use of Gen AI is in the sector, particularly amongst small charities. I imagine some people here have seen the range of surveys that have been out. There's been a variety from folks like We in AI and the Charity Excellence Framework and the Charity Digital Skills Survey, who all find slightly different percentages of use or uptake. But some are reporting very high rates of up to 80% of organizations using AI. Some are a bit lower. Either way, I think all these surveys agree that very few organizations feel prepared to tackle the challenges that are associated with AI adoption. So it's great to have these spaces where we can come together and learn from each other. That's a good starting point. Your staff are probably using it anyway. And no guidance at all can be a risk. So the second reason is that more and more products are integrating AI features. We're a Google-based organization, and so we have access to Google Gemini. Many other organizations are Microsoft-based, and so already have access to Copilot, and it's just becoming increasingly baked into tools, whether that's Canva or project management software or CRMs like Monday.com. So it's increasingly becoming almost hard to avoid. And then the third reason is to mitigate risk and just establish some standard practices and guides and incident response. So, maybe you have an employee who uses Gen AI to draft a report for a funder, but by doing that, they unintentionally upload some confidential information about beneficiaries. This could possibly be a data breach. And so there does need to be some guidance and training and policies to support staff and volunteers. And then I think the last reason is that I think the actual process, I found this while we've been working on our own, is helpful because it helps you clarify like what your kind of views are on AI, where it could add value, what your feeling of risk is, and what your staff's concerns are. So I think it's, as with many things, the being forced to think it through could be quite clarifying. And one thing I just wanted to remind folks as well is that we have a variety of organizations here. And so there's not going to be like a one size fits all solution. I've seen a variety of approaches, which I've linked here. There's an AI statement from the Wildlife Trust, which is quite high level and about their principles. My Society likewise have a longer but kind of set of principles as opposed to a specific policy. And then, on the extreme end, you might have something from like an NHS trust or a hospital, which I linked here as well. That's a much more detailed AI policy. And so different organizations are going to need different scales of things. And I think that we should all try to remember that, not to let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and that this is going to be iterative. So the technology is changing, your organization's needs are changing. It's okay to start with something and iterate. So with that, I am going to pass over to Kirsten, and she can tell us a little bit about how they have tackled this question at the Wellcome Trust.
Thanks, Dulcie. It's great to be here. So as Dulcie said, I'm the AI product manager for Wellcome Trust. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we've done here and our journey so far, and hopefully it will help. Next slide. So just a bit of context. Wellcome Trust, it's a health research funder. It's classed as mid-sized, which it's but feels very large, being around 1,000 people. We are already quite established in this space. We've had data and machine learning engineers in the organization for a very long time. And they've been doing work such as looking at our impact and understanding our portfolio. But it's very much been specifically focused on those sorts of particular tasks. And then obviously with this recent generative AI becoming mainstream and accessible to a much wider audience, it's basically increased this need for governance, need for strategy. So basically, I won't go through all of the points because Dulcie mentioned them before, but basically we had a huge need to basically take this in hand and shape this. So next slide. Okay, so our timeline. This predates myself. So I've been at the Wellcome Trust for 7 years, but in the data space. But I will talk through what's happened in the context of the sort of generative AI and what it has done for the organization. September 2023, based on the growing need to do something about it, a working group was convened. And you don't need to know all of these details. I'll highlight the key bits that are sort of important to this discussion about policy. But I think it's nice to see the sort of overall context of where we are and the steps that we've taken. So the working group was convened, and in the first instance, the first things that they did was to basically create an initial generative AI policy, which I will talk a bit more about what that involved and what that included. They created and released an internal instance of ChatGPT. And they also did a third thing, which was they decided they needed people dedicated to this task full time, which is myself, and an experienced design professional. So we started in April 2024, trying to basically understand the problem, looking internally, externally, understanding what was going on, trying to test out different tools, doing evaluations, seeing what people felt, and trying to put together a sort of foundational strategy with which we could move forward with. And now this led to this implementation phase, which is where we've sort of been doing quite a few things, but in addition to sort of innovation, etc., we've decided through the discovery work to sort of update our generative AI policy. So mainly what I want to point you to this is the fact that this evolution, and I'll talk through like where it was to begin with and where it is now, and why we made those decisions. Next slide. So key stakeholders, just to set the scene, I said that we had a working group. So the working group was really, it's getting the right people, making sure the right people are into that room when they were having those discussions about AI. So it's the person or people who understand your internal data and technology. It's the person or people who understand your data governance and information security and who know what those risks are should you bring something new in. And whether or not your use cases would would be sort of ethically appropriate. So those sorts of people were in the working group, and then also had representatives from across the business. And the reason that's really important is to understand from the perspective of the business, what is it important? So for us, that was our working group. And if for you, it might be a much smaller number of people, but it's just having the people in the room that understand those concepts. The other key stakeholders were leadership, who were making the decisions. So with the policy, this policy had to go to leadership to be signed off. And every time there's an update, it has to go to leadership to be signed off. We have an operations committee, which oversees all of our operational functions. But again, it's just to make sure that leadership are aware of any changes and that they're happy with those changes to the policy. That's just an important point that I just wanted to get put across. But I think it's also brings in the fact that actually with your leadership, and they're so integral to this sort of shaping of the AI strategy and the AI policy, it's actually really important as a side point to make sure that they understand what AI is, its limitations, and also just to be able to set expectations and align around an agreed plan. So that's the key stakeholders. Next. Okay, so as I said, we started out with this initial generative AI policy. It was really important to have something straight away to be able to guide employees and protect the organization. So that meant that the initial generative AI policy was extremely around those risks involving improper use and unethical use. So it was written, actually, in the first instance, it was written by our information governance expert, somebody who knows about those sort of data risks and also about sort of ethical concerns. But she got a very legal background, and this is exactly what it needed to be at the time. It was very much, making sure that people knew what they shouldn't do, so that we were sort of reducing our risk, our reputational risk, and making sure that things don't get inappropriately shared, or people aren't using them incorrectly. So this initial policy had a specified approved tools list, so things that we thought were okay. And initially, this was only 3 things. And it may be less in the first instance. So, for instance, if you decide a particular tool that you want to, look at, and that's on your approved list, then we had that specifically stated in the policy. In terms of breaches as well, we also stated where you should report a risk, a breach, and made sure that people were really sure about that. It also specified particular risks around AI, very specific things around IP and safe and ethical use. In terms of other things, we had a linked resource, which was a sort of list of use cases that had been defined by people across the business to say these are the sorts of use cases that we might have, and they'd been graded with a traffic light system to say appropriate or not appropriate. So that's our initial generative AI policy. Next. And throughout our discovery phase, we found that a few things. So we did a lot of work talking to the people in the business, users. We did some evaluations of some of our tools, our initial tools, and one was Copilot and one was our ChatGPT. So we really wanted to sort of take those into consideration. We found that obviously there's a huge focus on governance in the first iteration, and not so much on encouraging adoption and innovation. And actually, feedback from our user research showed that the fear of doing the wrong thing was hindering adoption. So there was this perceived concern around safety, privacy, and there was also concern around sustainability impact as well. So all of these gatherings from our user research has been really useful and helped us shape the sort of next phase. There was also a knowledge gap, so people fed back that they hadn't had enough training, and that they this is a really sort of good point, because it highlights the need to embed AI enablement into the heart of everything you do. And obviously having a policy is only one part of it. You need to be able to make sure that people know how to use these tools to really reduce the improper use, as well as being able to make sure people can use it effectively and innovatively as well. So there's obviously other things. There was it was written very much to be sort of a risk mitigation document. So it had quite inaccessible language. It was very legal lingo, and it had very fixed, like I said, it had, 3 stated tools, and every time you have to go to leadership to update it. So it therefore made it more difficult to make any changes to this policy. And there was also a lack of processes to support the policy. So it's all great to say, oh, okay, well, these are our tools, but then how do you add new tools? How do you add new use cases? How do you embed training that in the policy it says you have to have training, but how do you embed that? So that's a really important point that I'll talk about in a moment. It's also, just to point out, it's really difficult to prevent improper use. I'm sure you're probably all aware. And actually, we've had instances where we've had rogue meeting transcription tools where people have signed up to using free accounts, and then they've come into work meetings and then they've recorded and sent out an email to everyone afterwards, which means that you're risking the information that's supposed to be secure going to the wrong people. So had to lock those down, and then obviously there's an education piece around that. So even if you have things listed in your policy, even though we were very strict in the policy the first time, it still doesn't mean that it's enough. There's a lot of education around usage, and that's totally necessary to really make sure it's sort of enabled across the organization. One key point is just that so we just need to regularly review this policy evolution. It's going to be ongoing. As Dulcie said, it's a journey. It's something that with all the technology advances, with everything that's going on, with changing opinions from leadership, this is not going to be the last time this evolves. It will just continue to develop. Next slide. Okay, so this takes us on to our new updated policy. As I said, it is not the completed article. It is a step in the right direction, hopefully. So some of the discovery work included attending conferences and speaking to people. And this is also not just the internal view, but this external perspective has also fed into this updating the policy. And I'll give a couple of examples afterwards as well. So in terms of this updated policy, one thing that is I think most important is that the risks that we are now mitigating are not just improper use and unethical use, but also ineffective use, lack of alignment with our existing products or existing strategy, a lack of adoption, and also missed opportunity by not innovating enough or not using AI effectively enough to be able to enhance our processes. So in terms of the policy, there's a few things that we've added. First of all, we've made the language far more accessible. It's supposed to be sort of engaging. It's supposed to be easy to digest. People are not going to read it if it's really difficult to read, and they won't engage with it. So it has to be, obviously, it has to have a level of the right detail in. It has to be technically fluent, and it has to be relevant. But at the same time, people do need to want to engage with it. So I think that's a really important point that I got from a responsible AI conference. And actually, that's one of the key messages. Another one is that we have removed some of our fixed details. So such as these are the tools you can use. These are the current opinions. These are sort of the, do's and don'ts in a sort of very specific way. We've created an additional resource for our tools list. So that's really helped making it a lot more flexible so that, we can take the policy to leadership to sign off, but actually that additional tools list is now managed elsewhere by a smaller group of people, and people that we don't need to go to leadership every time to sign it off, which means it's a lot more dynamic. And yeah, can stay up to date. We've added new guiding principles. So these are supposedly supposed to shape user behavior around their use, and they're supposed to be memorable. So we've actually got an acronym. It's Thrive with AI. And so for that acronym, it's meant to so people can really easily remember, okay, T, transparent. I have to tell people when I've used AI. So it's supposed to really guide that that behavioural use, and not just be a list of all the things they've got to remember, and probably won't. And in that list is things around innovation. It's things about promoting experimentation in a safe way. It's also about adding those bits that may have prevented people from using it before. So, for instance, people at Wellcome are really concerned about the sustainable use because we're working in climate space. And so I think that seemed to go against our goals, our longer term goals for sustainability. However, we have put points in there. How can you reduce your impact on sustainability? So in the principles under E, it's ethical, and we have specific points around that sort of how to be better, more sustainable, which might be understanding how you prompt it efficiently so that you're prompting less. It might be around image generation, reducing your image generation, which is one of the biggest offenders in that space. So yes, the light's just gone up, sorry. So yeah, so the other main thing is that we also gave details to users around essential new processes. So I will talk a bit more about that in the next slide. But basically, as I said, having the policy is one thing, but you actually you need these processes in place to be able to support the policy. So as I said, we see this as a journey. It will be evolving. It will continue to grow, but we hope that these additions will make it far more, as I said, accessible and user friendly. Next slide. Okay, so as I said, in addition to the policy, there are other core processes that are required to align with it to ensure that AI is a success. And some of these things have obviously been spoken about before, but I think in the context of how they align with policy, I'll mention what we're doing. So we've got these sort of three pillars, I suppose: governance, innovation, and enablement. In the first instance, the governance, we're making sure that people can request new tools and request new use cases, and they know how to do this. So we have a procurement team, but it's just basically knowing which questions to talk to the vendors about. It's knowing to ask the right questions about, where the data. Previously, we've had questions about the data storage, but this is about where's the data processed, or where is, about the models, for instance. So we've added these checks into the current process, and it's just ensuring that, as I said, we have this in everything that we do. It's not about creating a new thing, it's about embedding it into its existing. So AI is going to proliferate, it's going to continue to get into everything that we do. So it would be counterintuitive to have a whole new stream for AI. It feels that you need to just make sure that AI is embedded into your current existing processes. And then, so the second arm is the innovation arm. So we're experimenting with new things all the time, and when people suggest things, we're experimenting with them and understanding their proof of value for the business. And if you can provide safe, effective, approved tools, then people are far less likely to go off elsewhere and try out different things. So making sure that you have those available to people and promote them is really important. And then finally, as I mentioned before about enablement, if people aren't properly trained in AI, don't understand its limitations, and don't understand how to sort of prompt effectively, then actually you are still not mitigating all those risks. So you're still not mitigating the risks of improper use or ineffective use. So they really have to, all of these have to be embedded in your policy, but also in your processes, and you have to have these new processes in place to be able to support your policy. Next slide. So this is a quote that I really enjoyed when I saw it at a conference. So I'm bringing it and I'm showing it to everyone. But it's basically a synergy of a car driving down a highway and basically saying if you don't have the guardrails in place, then your employees won't be able to won't know sort of it's that direction. It gives them the direction to be able to move faster and feel like they have that that they can go a bit faster and actually feel like they're in the right direction. So this is not meant to be stifling innovation. It's meant to support it. Next slide. And then finally, I just wanted to bring your attention to, so this is somebody I've seen at a couple of conferences, and I found really impressive documentation around policy and governance, in particularly this policy playbook, because I think it's got really nice, clear steps about writing AI policy, about how to implement it, comparisons with some of the policies like European policy, American policy, and UK policy. And I think it's just a really nice resource to sort of help guide you in your sort of journey of writing your policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. That was super useful. Loads of really useful like practical guidance and also like reflections. Before we jump into a few more pieces around getting started, there's been a few questions around. Could you tell us what the THRIVE acronym stands for? Because it sounds like a really useful way to remember your principles.
Full disclosure, Thrive is in the middle of approval. So that's part of the reason I didn't put it on the screen, but I will provisionally, knowing that this, if this could be updated, I will provisionally tell you. But it's transparency is the T, human-centered. It's now this is getting me because so HRIV, right? Let me just responsible, innovative, vigilant with data, and ethical. So those are our key our principles. And it's actually, so you have user principles, but you also as an organization should have your own principles. So it should be that, for instance, ethical, people know how to like prompt in the best way, but we as an organization should have our own principles around how we are ethical with AI. So how we look at the product providers and we like assess the product providers to make sure that we are doing the best we can to be ethical. So I hope that helps.
That's great. Thank you so much. Okay, so that as we go, please feel free to put more questions in the Q&A and we will tackle them at the end. I wanted to share now just a few lessons gleaned from our own research. So we've been scouring the internet and talking to folks on your behalf to try to learn some best practices for creating an AI policy. So I wanted to share what we've learned so far. The first step, as I think Kirsten also alluded to, is understanding your organization's needs. So we are a very small organization. We actually only have 5 staff, though we have many, many volunteers. And I think a good way to start when you're thinking about your AI framework or policy is what the kind of needs of your staff are, and also like what the kind of knowledge of Gen AI is across your organization, what the kind of wishes and fears are. So we did a staff questionnaire to understand how people were already using tools, and this wasn't to catch people out. This was genuinely, please tell us what you're finding helpful and what you're finding not helpful. The link is in the slides if anybody else wants to adapt it for their own use. So we asked people if they were currently using AI tools in their work, and then lots of other questions about kind of what tools they were using, what tools they wanted to try out, use cases that they had tried, use cases that they wanted to try, their primary concerns about AI use in the organization, and then also were there any kind of no-go areas? Like, are there any areas where you think we should definitely not do this? And one of the things that came up across the board was around not using Gen AI for kind of public messaging where we kind of need a personal touch because without any human review, for example. And in this kind of baselining phase as well, I think it can be really helpful to map your current state and data system. So what tools are you using? As I mentioned, we're Google based, so we have access to Gemini, but our CRM also has an AI option, for example. So mapping out what tools you're using, what has AI baked in, and then reviewing other relevant policies. What is your data retention policy? What is your data privacy policy? What is your data sharing policy? If relevant, thinking about those, because everything will need to be kind of coherent and reflected across those documents. Then, as Kristen mentioned, assemble your team. So again, this is going to look very different for different organizations. And I had 3 kind of examples here. So we're a staff team of 5. It would be overkill for us all to be involved, but realistically, everybody can be consulted. But we've just had one person kind of leading on it. The Tutor Trust did a presentation a while back through another event and have shared their slides. If they're here, if you want to say anything in the chat, please feel free. They assembled a cross-functional team to develop their AI policy, and this included a senior leader, a data protection or IT lead, somebody from the operations or programs team, and then I think also they had somebody from HR and for implementation and finance for kind of procurement. And then we saw previously that at Wellcome Trust, there was a core working group that had a variety of roles from across the organization. And I think it's easier to work with a small team just because it's going to be iterative. So, it's gonna need changing. Then think about your AI principles, or kind of guiding principles. I've linked a few different examples of those out there. The National Lottery Community Fund are shown here. Their principles of AI. I think that your policy needs to kind of be guided by your values, and I'll touch on this a bit later. But how you value kind of and weight innovation versus risk is going to vary depending on the organization and the organization's needs. But it can be helpful to think about what your principles are. So here, the community fund has principles around always having a human in the loop, being transparent about usage, and Kirsten shared the much catchier Thrive acronym as a guiding principle. But I think this would be helpful to shape the kind of almost the culture of the policy as well. And alongside this, thinking about your scope and objective. So how is AI being defined? Are you just limiting this to generative AI, or are you thinking about this in terms of any and all predictive technology? So I think that one of the common examples of what's being called predictive AI is any sort of predictive algorithm that maybe it's used in policing or in the justice system to predict who's at risk of repeat crime. But these algorithms can be used across a variety of different organizations. Is that within scope for your policy or not? And then who does this policy apply to? So Wellcome Trust, for example, are also a funder, and I've seen that many funders have guidance for how their grantees or prospective grantees should behave when it comes to AI. So thinking about whether this policy is just for your kind of internal staff or whether it's applying to people that you're working with. Does it apply to contractors? In our instance, we work with so many volunteers. So does it work? Does it apply to our volunteers? What's our guidance for volunteers? And what work is covered by this with this policy? Again, if you're a funder, are you thinking about this in terms of how you review your own grants or how you run your own internal meetings, or does it also apply to external things like people applying to work with you together? And in all of this, alongside the kind of principles, objective, and scope, I think that your policy is inevitably going to convey like a view about AI use. Kirsten spoke about how their welcome trust view is around mitigating risk, but also encouraging innovation. And I think every organization is going to land somewhere differently in that space between like regulation and exploration. And it's going to be a balance of your organization's kind of risk appetite, your sector. I can imagine that if you are, an environmental advocacy group might have like slightly different views, your capacity and interest in kind of innovation. And more risk-averse organizations will probably have a more restrictive policy. The policies that I've seen out of organizations like the NHS are quite detailed and long, but I can understand that because they're working with quite sensitive health data. So I think those are helpful questions to think about as well. I have reviewed many template in putting these slides together, and one that I really like that I think is very helpful and practical is from N10, who are an organization based in the US actually. But they have a lot of really good questions that you can ask yourself, and it's very detailed. So I've pulled some of the key points from there in terms of key questions to ask yourself and ask the working group that you've assembled when you're putting together your AI policy. So permissions, who gets to decide, and do staff need approval to use or develop AI? If yes, who's doing that? Like who's doing that approval? Use cases. I really like the idea of pulling that out into a kind of separate document so it can be more flexibly updated, but I think it's still helpful to think about, like, are there any no-go uses? And then within this guidance, they have very specific questions. Can you use AI to generate or edit externally written content? Generate or edit internally written content? What about visual content? And it really kind of walks you through quite step by step different use cases that you might want to consider. Data. What data can be used with AI tools? Can you put publicly available data that you might find on your website or things that are sort of semi-public in a staff handbook or manual, your own policies, for example, into Gen AI tools? Is that okay? What about, non-personal but potentially still sensitive data? Can that be used within AI tools? What about personal data? If you're working within a secure environment where the data is not shared back, for example, if you're working with it within Azure, is that okay? What kind of agreements need to be in place? Transparency. They have this as a question. I think we've conveyed a view on this question already. Like, how transparent do you need to be about AI use? I think it's helpful to always be transparent, basically, about how AI was used to create content, edit content, or to do tasks. Definitely to if you're using AI in like service delivery, for example. So I think it's a question to ask, but I think the answer in our view is transparent. And then review. Which cases need kind of a human in the loop review? Some have it kind of baked in, like if you're using an AI tool for kind of brainstorming, by nature you are reviewing it. But do all use cases need human in the loop review? Are there any exceptions? So I'd encourage folks, if you are working on a policy, I really like this guidance, the resource as well that Kirsten mentioned from Oliver Patel is also very practical as well. And then communicate, iterate, and get feedback. So I think as we've heard already, you can't make a policy and then just have it live somewhere on your drive without the kind of processes to share what the policy is, ensure that people understand what generative AI means and includes, and that you have a chance to iterate and get feedback. So, these are just examples of some of the folks that you might want to engage to get feedback on the policy. So, ultimately the Board of Trustees will have kind of strategic oversight, but it could be helpful to get feedback from volunteers if they're handling data or use organizational tools, from your finance team if you're doing kind of vendor procurement. I'll pop a link as well in the chat from another group who've done some work about like ethical vendor procurement, which I think is interesting. Your stakeholders, so your beneficiaries, particularly if the way that you're using AI is affecting your service delivery, and whether that you're a funder or you're a kind of one-to-one service delivery organization, I think is important to get their feedback. And then, partner organizations, possibly you need like legal advice if there's more complicated compliance issues as well. And then, lastly, just to end, there's a wealth of examples and resources out there. I have listed some of our favorites. These here are more kind of like guidance, but there's several templates out there, like at different scales, and then several different examples. From the National Lottery, My Society, this is a statement from the Wildlife Trust, and then there's one that the Arts Marketing Association as well made for a collection of kind of arts-based organizations in the UK. So we're going to have lots of time for questions as well, but before we do that, we would love just to remind you to fill in our feedback form, because it helps us understand what is working and what's not working about these events, and it helps us develop like future events for the future. And it's also particularly helpful for us and others working in this space to know what sort of support would help you like develop it within generative AI. Maybe you'd be interested in a kind of peer working group on building an AI policy. What would you like to see? So please do fill in the feedback form, and I will pop that in the chat. But now we are going to go to some questions. So we have a question here that's, how can you support volunteers to use AI safely and effectively? I think this could apply to volunteers and staff, but like, how can you support the people who work for you to use AI safely and effectively? It feels like a list of approved tools would be too restrictive, but how do you ensure proper usage? So yeah, Kirsten, maybe you can start and then I can speak about what we've done a little bit as well.
Sure. So what I probably should have said in what we've done in the newest version is, it's rather than having, because it's just so many use cases are coming through, obviously some of them are consistent across the board, so we're sort of creating a list and looking through that. But basically we have created a classification system that is much more like what criteria would classify something as high risk, medium risk, or low risk. And I think it's about educating people around those sorts of things. So in terms of your data use, as Dulcie mentioned, like, the sorts of data you can't put into AI tools. It might be that you can sort of encourage volunteers to use tools, but just make sure that they're not putting personal identifiable data in, or anything relating to sort of anything that's business secure, or anything like that can't be put in AI tools. Otherwise, go ahead. Maybe it depends on, as Dulcie said, it depends on your risk appetite. But I think for volunteers, as long as they're given that education around what they can't put in, then I think generally it's okay to sort of just support them in that way. And also just to promote things that potentially are a bit safer than others. So I think having that knowledge of the tools in the different spaces, and I've seen a question later on about like, how do we use it? So I'll talk about it then. But I think there's certain tools you can lots of tools, but actually a lot of them are overlapping. And if you find that, if you go via that sort of very much strategic use case led, okay, how can I summarize information? How can I, break the blank page? Those sorts of really high category type use cases, you can kind of have a few things where they work well, um, they're safe, in the scheme of the sort of bigger picture, and then you can promote those as well.
Yeah, I would agree with everything you said there. In terms of our work with volunteers, so we work with volunteers who work directly a lot of the time with our beneficiaries. So if they're doing like one-to-one data projects with charity partners, our AI guidance is actually really just being shaped by guidance that we already had in place around the use of third-party tools. So basically our guidance is you can do things with data locally, like on your own computer, but you can never share partner data with a third-party software. So this doesn't even necessarily apply just to like things like ChatGPT. You also can't upload data to Tableau Cloud because that then puts like the data in a website that the charity probably doesn't want there to be access. So we already had guidance that said you can't like no partner data can be uploaded or to third-party software. So that's kind of like includes all of the AI tools. I think we did actually have a list of kind of like approved tools. I mean, then we said like if you want to use something different, you need to ask. So for example, kind of coding assistant tools for us, because the volunteers are kind of doing data analysis and data science work is completely fine. But there's some special use cases around like kind of online collaboration that we had to we basically said like if you want to do something different, please talk to somebody. So that's kind of how we've approached it. Yeah, for now, but I think it will probably evolve. Okay, there's lots of questions which is great. For the folks who put them in the chat, if it's possible to pop them into the Q&A, that will make it easier for me to make sure that they're not missed. But I will try to cross-reference the chat as well. So this is a tricky one, but let's try. In terms of security of data, if we don't want the info to be shared, which AI tool is the most secure? I don't know, Kirsten, if you want to comment on that, or I can share a little bit from what we've done in other sessions as well.
Well, we are a Microsoft first organization, so we are I think the one we generally point towards is Copilot. Obviously it's different because it's a large organization and we've invested in Copilot. We have as a business, because we have the Microsoft products, we have the web version. Everyone has the web version. We don't have to pay for licenses. I assume that's not the case unless you are sort of a certain size. So I maybe Dulcie, you might be better placed to answer this.
I mean, I think it depends kind of what you mean by secure as well. So I think yeah, I guess it depends what you mean by security. So if you mean which tool is not going to share any of the data that you put into the prompt, like use any of the data that you put into the prompt for kind of model training purposes. We have some of that guidance in our previous webinar. Like by default, ChatGPT does use your prompts and data for training purposes, but you can turn that feature off. I think by default Claude doesn't, so it's a bit more secure in that sense. But there's ways of making different systems secure. For example, if you did use Microsoft and you used their cloud service Azure, their OpenAI tool, like the data is like contained within the cloud, within that kind of cloud system. So I think there's yeah, it's hard to answer because there's lots of different options. I think you more have to think about like what data you're putting in into it as well. Um, okay, here's a question for Kristen now. Can you give some examples of how you're using AI within the Wellcome Trust?
Yes. So a big part of it is workplace productivity. So I mentioned Copilot because we're experimenting with its sort of full capabilities and what you can do with it. And they've done a couple of case studies recently, which are, I wouldn't say immediately obvious, such as like trying to sort of, I think we've done some sort of looks to the future, understanding some of the we've been gathering insights around what we want to do in a sort of 3 year to 5 year plan. And because we had lots of people feeding into this, and a very short timeline, we actually got we sort of shaped prompts to help us with that analysis. There's also getting data to sort of getting data cleansing from the past, like reading from PDFs, etc., and getting and using it to help with our sort of system. So in addition to sort of the classic productivity, we're also finding ways to do it like that. We're also so obviously productivity is one element. We're looking at sort of operational efficiency as well. So how part of the work that we've been doing is going around and understanding use cases across the business. What are the sort of pain points that are hindering teams from working efficiently? Is there sort of ways we can automate processes using AI? So we've been really working across multiple areas of the business to see if we can build out. We've actually starting to look at agentic AI and see if we can create this to sort of some of the workflows that are very, I would say, repeatable and yeah, it's still very much in the sort of we haven't actually released anything, but we're looking at not the processes to do with our funding, but we're looking at the processes that align with those. So it might be how do we for instance, finding information to help respond to certain queries that we might get from people about so people asking questions about the applications process, and then we can create something with our policies and guidance and from our web page, condensing that information and helping the person who's shaping those answers to answer those more quickly and efficiently. But everything that we do, it's always like having it as an assistant rather than as a sort of taking it away from that job from that person. So as Dulcie said, it's that human in the loop, making sure whatever we create is supplemented by that human eye. So we're doing, like I said, a bit mixture of this, like I said, workplace productivity, and also looking at our operations and trying to pinpoint where we can add value.
Oh, that's great. That's super interesting. I know as well that the Wellcome Trust data team have a blog which has some more technical information. Try to find the link and pop that in the chat. In case we have like more technical data folks on the call today. Okay, so the next question, I actually had this question as well, because you were talking about the importance of training and like ensuring that people knew kind of what Gen AI was, and this is both like at a leadership level and then also staff in terms of training on particular tools. And so Chloe's asked what kind of training can be offered to staff and volunteers so they know how to use AI sensibly. And I was wondering the same thing, like whether your training is kind of in-house, or if there's particular trainings that you found useful.
This is an interesting question, because I think two main sources of training. One is the general understanding of AI. Like what is it? What isn't it? What are its limitations? Trying to set expectations. And I think that's quite generic. And in terms of, I think that is something that you can find elsewhere. We had a partner called Humble AI that came to help us with that messaging in terms of like just upskilling people in that sort of like broader what is AI space. But then you've also got the sort of how to use it And I think for that, it felt like we did have some support from Microsoft, but actually it felt like it came better from internally because we really understood what people were trying to do. And I think all the training really needed to be tailored to understand. So if people didn't understand how it embedded into their workflow, then they were unlikely to actually take it up. So it was much we found it was much better to have somebody internally, liaising with the people, understanding what they're trying to do day to day, and then seeing how we can translate that into their day-to-day workflow. So I'd say there's some components that you can do generally, but when it comes to actually trying to embed it, I think that comes better internally.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think the only thing I'll add, just because I know that a lot of folks probably don't have like the capacity or expertise like out there to necessarily tailor. But I completely agree with what you were saying. I know that the folks at Cast, for example, have a number, they have like a kind of online like intro by email course just to kind of explain what Gen AI is. I think that could be a helpful starting point. And I will pull out the links um, uh, from our previous webinars, which, there's a number of kind of good introductory courses on Coursera and deeplearning.ai, which are accessible to kind of different levels as well. I know Microsoft has their own series. I haven't gone through that one myself because we're not Microsoft based, but yeah, there's a variety of trainings out there. But I think the challenge with and this doesn't apply to any AI training, and it's just I think a training problem in general, but I think you have to have a thing that you're trying to do to like kind of make the most value out of any training. So yeah, I think that will affect people's motivation.
Um, I just
But
wanted
also,
to add, sorry.
sorry, go ahead,
Oh
Kirsten.
no, I just wanted to add, I think actually having champions in your workplace is really, really crucial as well. So I think that having people who are really interested and engaged and willing to learn, and then can bring that and upskill other people is very, very useful.
I would say as well, if folks here have done any training that they really, really recommend, or just recommend in general, please pop those links into the chat. We'll collate them because I think it's always helpful to know from actual people in the sector what they found helpful. Okay. So this is a good question as well. We are developing a policy specifically regarding the environmental impact of using generative AI. We've talked a little bit about sustainability, but are there any examples or tips that you could share of those kinds of policies? I don't know if this has come up.
Trying to think back. So I know that we had some discussion. So our user researcher, she spoke to a few places. I think she spoke to Google and National Lottery and another couple of places to just to understand what they were doing in the space. I don't remember off the top of my head what the sort of examples were. I'm wondering if that's something we created a sort of literature review based on that research. I'm just wondering whether we might be able to share it. I'll have to ask about that.
I think the one that I've seen that's like specifically around kind of AI policy and the environment is like principles from Friends of the Earth. Um, I will try and dig that up as we talk to the next question. I have put a good link for kind of like environmental primer in the chat from Hugging Face. I think my go-to person, I think the world's go-to person for um, uh, like overview of the environmental impacts of AI is Sasha Luciani from Hugging Face. And so they have a lot of really good resources. But Friends of the Earth did a session earlier this year around kind of AI principles with an environmental lens. And I will just try to find that and put that in the chat as well. Or if anybody else is here and knows that, you're welcome to add that in as well. there's so many questions. This is really great. Thank you, everybody. So, how might you think about mapping AI use across the organization? And actually, Kirsten, I don't know if this is something that you necessarily did at Wellcome Trust because you're so large. But Alice, who asked this question, said that she's heard that this is maybe a bit of a defunct task because we're approaching a stage where AI is baked into most things at an ever expanding rate. So I guess the first question is, did you kind of map AI usage across the organization, or did you come in first for a kind of regulatory lens? And then
So
how
I assume this is AI, is this AI use through approved mechanisms or non-approved? Because in terms of AI use, part of our metrics of success is to understand how many people are using these different tools. So we do monitor. So I'll say both. We do monitor the use of the different various tools that we have approved, and that's really important for us because it can show like where, because although you think that everyone would be using it, it's actually incredibly, even if you give somebody a tool, they don't necessarily use it. And actually without proper enablement and repeated sort of engagement, actually we found a drop off. And so even though we were giving like Copilot licenses, we saw a big drop off once we finished engagement. So there was a real sort of, that was actually, showing it's not as, it's not, I think we have around maybe a third of the organization regularly using AI at most. So this is what I mean. It's not everyone. In terms of use by other things, we don't monitor it in that way. And we've tried not to do that because we don't want to. And even in our evaluations, when we've asked people, how does this compare to other AI tools? We're using it in a very sort of transparent way in terms of how can we make the things that we are creating and providing better, rather than, well, what are you using? Don't use that sort of thing, because ultimately, we want that transparency. We want people to be able to feel like they can, an openness, and talk to us about what they are doing. And if there's something that's really good, obviously we can, say, don't use business data in these tools, but it's really helpful for us to know if things are being used and why. Just hopefully not in in an insecure way.
For us, in terms of mapping the use across the organization, we're really small, so it was much easier. So we did a questionnaire of staff, and I've seen this actually done. There's a nice case study from the Annenberg Foundation. Let me just pull it out. Who were working with an organization called Tag Tech, and they were quite early, I would say, in terms of thinking about what their AI approach could look like. Let me just pop that in the chat. But for us, yeah, we did a survey to kind of map AI usage, and the survey was like, which AI tools have you used for work purposes? And so we had, ChatGPT, AI transcription tools, AI writing tools like Grammarly, AI image generation tools, AI presentation tools like Gamma, any like research assistant tools, any AI scheduling or productivity tools, coding assistants. And we went through and asked people, like, have you ever used these and what have you used them for? And then also like similar questions about like what you would want to do. And then as I mentioned earlier, questions around kind of boundaries and concerns. From like a kind of technical tool perspective, like we don't have that many tools. So it's easy to kind of just like list the ones that we have available, and so we can map them in that way. I think the other one, the other case study that I point to is around like kind of Annenberg Foundation, because I thought that was quite interesting. But yeah, if other folks have approaches to this mapping question, again, we're all here to learn from each other, so feel free to pop that in the chat too. Okay, we have lots more questions, so I'm just going to keep firing questions at you, Kristen, if that's okay. So this question's from Natalie, and they're wondering, it feels like part of the policy is kind of an internal facing part, like about how the team is using it. And then another part is external, about like if you're a funder, for example, applicants and grantees. Do you have this as a single policy, or is there a more externally facing thing, like a privacy policy?
We have two policies, and it obviously the user base or the audience is different. So I think we've got a joint funder statement that basically says it's actually very I'd say open to use of AI. Our policy is very much in line with just let us know so that we can monitor. And it's also just I suppose the thing is that the risks are different because as a funder, we take people's information and we are then custodians of we're responsible for that data. Whereas when people use it on their own information, so if somebody's using it to create an application for a grant and it's their own data, then it's it's sort of their data that they're putting at risk. So I think the risks are very different. And we obviously our biggest thing is that we do not want to put anyone's data at risk. And it's so I think it has to be two separate policies because it's quite a different way of dealing with it. We are far more sort of, I suppose, stringent about how we handle information than we would advise people with their own.
That makes sense. I've seen like other funders kind of separate it out as well. So I think that's the common approach. Okay, I'm going to try and get through as many of these questions as we can. Miranda has a question about which I think is an interesting one. I'm curious if you have an answer to it at all. But in policies, have you thought about protecting your content from being used by other AI tools? For example, if you publish resources and do not want them to be used by AI tools.
It's not something that we have looked into, I don't think. Yeah, I suppose everything we put out externally, it's put out and we've chosen to put it out there into the public. So I suppose, but it's an interesting question though. So thank you for
Yeah, it's really tricky. I mean, I know that currently I've lost track of how many people are suing who. But you know, the New York Times certainly is suing some of the major tool providers out there for stealing content effectively. I don't think, I guess aside from maybe putting things behind a kind of link or paywall, but even that I think you could circumvent if you particularly wanted to. I don't know that it's possible to protect your content from being used by AI tools in the same way that it's very difficult to do that um, uh, with anything that's like on the internet. If anybody else has any insights there, would be happy to learn. But I think that that's quite difficult unless, you know, things are behind a kind of paywall. And again, even then, um, I guess the only thing is that, you know, if you publish today, most like the models have mostly been trained, but more models will be created and they'll be trained. So there's a risk. Um, okay. So let's see. This is an interesting question. So I don't know if you have had this happen and or if you can disclose, but like what's your process for managing breaches? So let's say that you have, you know, a user who's accidentally put confidential data into a prompt, like are there guidelines that you follow? Yeah.
I think from my perspective, so this is the data governance component. So I think first of all, it definitely depends on what information has been shared. And I think we have a very well established sort of data protection information governance team, and this is across the board. I think if you have a data breach, whether it's AI tool or whether it's just general, and you've sent an email containing information that you shouldn't have, it will cover. I would have thought cover the same processes in terms of reporting, need for reporting. But I say internally, as I said, we had a couple of instances where like we had meeting minute tools join, but it was all, although they were things were sent to people, it was all sent to people internally, and it was all things that in the sense of the contain, we obviously it's like you contain it, you understand why why this happened and the process of like trying to mitigate it from future. But then there's also the element of, depending on the data, you may then also have to escalate that depending on what data, whose data is that is being shared.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. It's covered by a lot of that. The ICO does have some in-depth guidance as well, which I've put in the chat. And again, we're going to share all of these resources with everybody afterwards. On that note, it made me think of another question that's come up, which I don't know how you've approached this at Wellcome Trust, but how have you approached using tools that are already integrated into software, for example, like the AI meeting transcriptions? Sometimes this can feel quite like natural just to use, and I've been in meetings where there's like 8 assistants or something. So how have you approached this sort of integration at Wellcome?
Well, I suppose it's a couple of things. So one is like I suppose the like turning features on. So obviously there's the tools where, such as like the meeting management tools, where we have, but they can join and attach into our systems. But then there's also if you've got a platform and you decide, should I decide to turn this feature on and off? So those are two different things. One is that we generally are trying to, as an organization, not have such a huge tech stack that we can't manage it, because I think that's the thing. If you've got too many different things, it's really difficult to have that oversight on it. So in terms of the meeting management tools, the reason why obviously we want to make sure things are safe, but we also can't have 10 different tools for one task. So we're very much a case of, okay, let's try out a few, and then help decide which one it is that we want to take forward. I think that's the thing. It's in terms of whatever tool whether it's a tool or whether it's turning on a feature, depending on what the question is sort of angled towards. It's very much a case of because there are just so many things available. And it's just, we can't turn on everything. We can't have everything because it's just going to cost far too much. So actually, it's really putting it right back down to what is the person trying to achieve? Have we got something for that already? Yes, we do. Great. Use that. If it's not good enough, let us know why, and then we can look at that again. Otherwise, it just becomes too unmanageable.
Yeah, so again, I think this goes back to the sort of broader point of like make sure you're solving a problem that make you know what problem you're trying to solve, and make sure you're actually solving that problem, which I think is something we always need to remember. In terms of like how we've managed this specific case ourselves in terms of AI meeting transcription, we in the same way that we would inform people if a meeting was being recorded or ask their consent for it to be recorded, we ask consent for it to be transcribed, and don't do it if somebody doesn't want to do it. And I think it really depends on the use case and like what you're using it for. The Merle Tech Initiative has a nice blog about why they generally don't have AI systems in their meetings unless they're there for an accessibility perspective. Because for the types of meetings that they do, it makes they said that they found that it makes people kind of less engaged and less kind of trusting, because they feel like, oh, it's going to be transcribed anyway. So I think it all goes back to thinking about what your use case is, how you're going to test it, how you're going to know that it worked, and that kind of thing.
I was going to say in terms of the meeting minutes as well, it's like in the traditionally you wouldn't have everyone writing minutes because the whole point is that you need to have that validation and check. So usually you'd have someone writing minutes because they would, be able to sort of validate that. So really, it's also about like if you've got a certain task like meeting minutes, you should still have one person who's in the room maybe doing that. Not everyone, because not everyone will check them, and therefore you might end up with lots of different versions of the meeting and what was said. You should make sure that you still have that gold standard set of truth, which is somebody's recorded it, somebody's checked it, and that has been done rather than just having lots of people recording lots of different things.
Okay, we have a few more minutes left, so I'm just going to see if there's any things that relate to kind of policy that we haven't necessarily uh, tackled. So let's see. So one person asked a question about the kind of pace of change, and so I think it might be interesting to get your reflections on that. So Peter asked or noted that within their organization, they feel that we're talking about guardrails, but at the same time, colleagues are experimenting with all kinds of things, and everything is changing very, very quickly. Um, how do you kind of build on this energy, um, versus making these policies that are kind of more fear-based and risk? Like you touched on this a little bit, but like how did you kind of get that balance right for your organization in terms of innovation versus risk?
I mean, it's a very, very interesting question because I think with us, I think part of the problem and the reason why we're probably weighted slightly more in the governance is the size of our organization because you don't, there's, I suppose, increased risk with the size because you just can't know what everyone's doing. There are a lot, we do engage a lot with the people who are excited that we make them our champions and that keeps them excited. And then they are the people that help us drive innovation. So I think really making sure that you capture that energy is key. And also, if I'm honest, like especially because we've had such a small team and it's such a big organization, I would say we've definitely I'd say borrowed time of people who are so energetic and want to experiment with things. So I think, obviously we can't try out everything, but being able to allow people that energy and that drive. So if you've got things to do and to experiment with, getting people involved in that will help keep that enthusiasm rather than letting it fizzle out. And it might be that we can't play with all the different tools that people are excited about, but at least we're sort of not letting people getting sort of I suppose their fire put out. I would say if anything, part of the thing about like not letting things, because there are so many things coming all the time. Part of the reason why we are very consistent about what do you need, let's look at that, is because I think there's also a fatigue which will be like learning new things all the time. It actually fatigues people. So if they were learning something and it didn't really work, and then learning something else and it didn't really work, then they actually might lose trust in AI as a concept rather than because the tool wasn't the right one. So I think it's also about balancing that, and it's not just about governance. It's about just making sure you don't burn people out when they're trying to do lots of different other things in their roles.
And on the flip side, like how did you handle kind of people's fears and concerns of AI use in general?
I think that was so we spoke to people. I think that having evaluations and having people feedback and having user research sessions allowed us to have that conversation. I think for us, Copilot was a really good conversation starter. People wanted Copilot, but they didn't know what for, and they not necessarily have needed it. But it meant that we could talk to people, and I think that was hugely beneficial to understand what people's perceptions were, what their concerns were. And then as I said, we we've collected those things, and when we've done events, when we've done training, we've tried to incorporate those fears into our training, into our into everything, into our promotional pieces as well. We've got what we're developing, an AI Centre of Excellence, which is a developing resource of different resources. So whether it's innovation or pieces about, for instance, how what AI and sustainability, things like that, we put them all in the same place and direct people so that they can see those and see that we've considered them, and hopefully that will make them feel more comfortable about the direction of where we're going.
Thank you so much. I think, we have a couple minutes left. I don't think we almost got through all the questions, but thank you to everybody for joining as well, and thank you for all of the questions and engagement. That was wonderful. Please do fill in our feedback survey. I've popped it in the chat. I want to give a really big thanks again to Kirsten for answering rapid fire questions and sharing her experience at Wellcome Trust. And thank you to the team at Insight Infrastructure for Joseph Rowntree Foundation for helping support this series. There's clearly like a huge need for this kind of learning. So thank you so much. We will be sharing all of the resources that folks have shared and the resources as well from the chat. The recording will be available soon. Enjoy the rest of your afternoons or days wherever you may be. Thank you again.